All right. Welcome, everybody. Um, my name's Tiffany Wen. I will be hosting this conversation. I'm the Content and Partnerships Manager at Soltara. And before introducing our guest today, I just want to set this up and why we're here. So here at Soltara, we are always striving to be a bridge between the global north and the south as we bring Shipibo-led, trauma-informed ayahuasca healing and the often overlooked aftercare of integration to non-Indigenous seekers from around the world. And, in this conversation, we're here to spotlight other valid ways of knowing, healing, and building up our mind-body connection so that we can release past traumas that we accumulate over a lifetime and much more. So with that, I am super excited to be hosting Jesse Gould, the founder of Heroic Hearts Project. Jesse Gould is really impressive. He's the founder and president of the Heroic Hearts Project, which is a nonprofit pioneering psychedelic therapies for military veterans. After being deployed himself as an Army Ranger in Afghanistan 3 times, he founded the Heroic Hearts Project in 2017 to spearhead the acceptance and use of ayahuasca therapy as a means of addressing the current mental health crisis among veterans. The Heroic Hearts Project has raised over $350,000 in scholarships from donors, including Dr. Bronner's, and partnered with the world's leading ayahuasca treatment centers, as well as sponsored psychiatric applications with the University of Colorado Boulder and the University of Georgia. Jesse helps shape treatment programs and spreads awareness of plant medicine as a therapeutic model. Really driven by a mission to help military vets struggling with mental trauma, he's best known for his own inspiring battle with PTSD and his recovery through ayahuasca therapy. So welcome, Jesse. It's a real honor to have you with us here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Always have I've known like the founders of Soltar for quite a while, so it's always good to be involved and create this kind of content. So very happy to be here.
Yeah, you go way back when to the early days of Soltara, of course. And I'd love to start this conversation with your personal story, because I think stories move us, right? And oftentimes people find out about things like ayahuasca and other more alternative therapies through relationships and through stories that they really believe in and want to, believe in themselves. And so this intersection of PTSD and ayahuasca has really been a springboard for your life's work. So I'd love to sort of hear your personal narrative around how did you find ayahuasca and how has it really impacted your life? I know that's a huge question, but maybe we can just start there.
Yeah, so I got out of the military in 2014. Like you mentioned, I had done a number of deployments to Afghanistan. Generally, when I first got out, I thought, I had a background in finance, economics. I just got completed, being a leader in the Range Regiment. And so I thought I was going to hit the ground running, like what could stop me. And on the outside, I was pretty successful in terms of finding jobs eventually. And on the outside, had all the like green check marks. But what I found is I started having some mental health issues that I really didn't expect, nor could I really understand. I just knew I wasn't living up to my full capacity, my full ability. I just felt like I had this weight, and just being affected by things like anxiety, depression, all this other kind of stuff. And as anybody else, it probably took me a while to kind of figure it out or come to terms with it, just because I don't want to admit that, especially like I said, coming from this dynamic of like, oh, that can't affect me. But there I was, kind of not doing really well on a mental health side, and fortunately, I saw the red flags and I was like, all right, well, let's figure out whatever this is and what can we do. So I tried a lot of different things, a lot of like holistic things. Tried to go to Department of Veteran Affairs to do therapy. But what became pretty clear pretty quick was, especially like the VA was just very much dogmatic about the medication prescription model. And, there's a time and place, and I had some people I knew that, it saved their life, but I had a lot of other people that the medications didn't address the problem. It just sort of muted the problem and then had all sorts of other side effects. And so I was trying to avoid that as long as possible. And so I found myself in a situation where it was like I was struggling, but it was pretty clear that nobody really knew realistic answers of how to get to a better spot. Roundabout way, heard a podcast. I think it was a podcast that included, a friend of Soltara, Aubrey Marcus. He was talking about his ayahuasca journey at a place in Peru. And I kind of just, I was just listening to it, not really paying attention. It wasn't super, it was just kind of more of his relation of what he saw and all that kind of stuff. I was like, okay, cool story, whatever. For whatever reason, it planted a seed, as what tends to happen in the space, and became more and more prominent in my brain. And I think as my life was becoming less and less happy, and I needed some sort of answers, ayahuasca became sort of that, like, all right, let's give this a shot. Having never done psychedelics, so with all the nervousness and all the bias that we tend to hold around these things, so I did as much due diligence as possible. Found a place in Peru, and kind of took a leap of faith. It was like I just got to the spot of like, whatever I'm doing right now is not working, and I'm getting scared of where it's going to end up. So why not? Let's give this what I viewed at the time of a radical answer a shot. So I went there to a place called Spirit Quest in Peru, and it was very challenging. Very, very challenging. But towards the end of it, after my own ceremonies, undeniable that it had a profound and positive effect, and effects in ways that took me quite a while to unravel, if I've even fully done that to this point. So that was sort of the genesis of Heroic Hearts, of like coming from this, of like what just happened. Looking around, there was really no veteran organization talking about it. I had a lot of friends, like I said, that were going through their own struggles in very similar spots or more severe spots. And so it was just at that spot of like, hey, I sort of stumbled into this in my own life. People deserve to at least know, if they've tried many other things, that why not give this a shot in the same sort of sense that I did. And so from there, just sort of figure out along the way, like, how do you start a nonprofit? How do you, what's necessary? So it's education, but then also along my path, a lot has evolved in the past 3 to 4 years in the psychedelic space. So just even talks about integration, talks about preparation. A lot of that has really come more about in the more recent times. So what I was lacking in my preparation and my post care, that's really what we've tried to incorporate in our own programmatic side of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for starting with your story. You answered this. This would have been my next question, which is, at the time that you first sought it out and you went to Peru, were there other veterans with PTSD, with similar backgrounds and experiences, turning to psychedelics and specifically ayahuasca? And it seems like the answer is no. It was not as popular, or I don't even know if we can say it's popular today, but it wasn't really well known when you started your own journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely veterans turning to it. There's a lot of people now that I've met that, went in the years preceding me going this and that, but they went in their own sort of avenues, right? Like they didn't have a platform or that helped their life, but that was strictly in their capacity. There have been like some organizations here and there, but there really wasn't a discussion. There really wasn't a prominent discussion about it.
Right.
It wasn't it's grown a lot since then. So now, even in the veteran space, a lot of vets have talked and heard about psychedelics and are pursuing it on their own. It was not like that at all. And so even when I was
Right.
looking into what I just did, because I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and I was looking like, hey, I want to start this organization. Let me see what else is out there. And so there's some like decrim groups or like, Facebook groups here and there, but there really wasn't, what I thought was necessary. There was no programmatic veteran option to get access to psychedelics. There really was no guidance or education in a prominent way within the veteran community.
Right. Which segues perfectly because, alas, we have Heroic Hearts Project, which you started, and you kind of hinted at this, but it's not just about, okay, let's go on retreat and that's it, but it's a whole journey from the preparation into the experience and then beyond. And I would love to hear about what that program looks like. And also, before you get into that, I was looking at the Heroic Hearts Project's annual report, and I saw that your guys' focus for 2022 is around community. And I just want to pull out this little phrase because I thought it was very telling as far as not just like veterans and ayahuasca, but just like ayahuasca healing as a whole, like where is there room for growth? And so this little excerpt says, the infrastructure and community systems that are crucial for real change are still severely lacking. Heroic Hearts Project will be working hard with our partners to build community-based models so that our veterans will continue to be supported long after these life-changing journeys. So talk a little bit about that. What is this full holistic journey that's part of this or other programs at Heroic Hearts Project?
Yeah, absolutely. And the immediate answer is it's still an ever evolving sort of process. So a lot of it we have to give recognition to, the indigenous communities like the Shipibo that we're working with them to use these already established models. But there is also the sense of, we have different ways, perspectives. The Western world is going to be somewhat different from somebody who grows up in a Shipibo community. The traumas and what you focus. So there does need to be sort of a blend. There needs to be an evolution of our own sort of model while also paying respect and working with indigenous partners and giving them all the due credit and everything else that's involved with that. And so the side of it, and one of the things we quickly always pushed is, we didn't want like another like this is your medication. It was never sort of a concept that the more psychedelics the better. Psychedelics are the magic pill. This is going to heal you magically. And I think that comes out from the traditions that a lot of these indigenous tribes use is like, this is a long process. There's a lot of preparation. Even how they work with Western communities is different how they might work with local communities. And so there's much more to it than just, the trip. There's much more to it than just a substance. And it's really a process of getting to know yourself, using these plants as the teachers and enlightening yourself of being more connected to your intuitions, to your traumas, so you better process it, so you don't get buried by them. You don't get into these spots where you're so entrenched into your own trauma, because then that feeds into itself and then you create more. And so for me, what I said was lacking was like a lot of retreats out there really didn't have sort of a preparation beyond like, here's a guide. And they might have talked about integration a little bit, but there really was no sort of support. And so I kind of had to, stub my toe a little bit in terms of my own journey and figure out like, okay, well, I could have done this better had I known about this, or this is what I would have felt helpful. And so that's an ever evolving process. And so that's what we create. So right now our program, veterans that come to us, one, we do intake just because, as we know, psychedelics are not for everybody. And especially if have certain health conditions or on certain medications, it can be dangerous. And so we do an intake to make sure that the people are aware of those risks. And then we do 4 to 6 weeks of preparatory work. So getting somebody in the right mindset of what to expect, some tips and tricks. There's no way to fully prepare for it because it's so beyond words, but you can, one, get yourself ready for it. And then two, also know what to expect, how to approach it. So in that way, if you have a really hard experience, you're not just going to go run and be like, oh, that was a bad trip. You're going to understand that hard experience is actually probably you getting pretty close to some major answers. And this is sort of the way to approach that. Also working with retreat centers, as we know, it's becoming more popular. So doing our part to promote those that are respectful, work with Indigenous communities that are sustainable on the many different levels, that keep tradition, that keep ceremony, places like Soltara, and that are focused more on trauma work as opposed to other ways of working with these medicines. And then the follow up, the final care, the integration, the aftercare, which I think is the biggest sort of black box right now. We have words for it, but it depends on each person. You know, I can say to a room like go meditate and do breath work, and you're probably going to get 1 out of 50 that might follow up with that. So it's providing more tools, but then also increasing the access or the ease of access to these tools. Starting a meditation practice can be pretty daunting if you have never done it before, and all this takes practice and commitment, discipline to it. And so that's what you mentioned, the community piece, which I think is still very much lacking. And we see this in the veteran community, but I think it's reflective of the broader community, is our community systems have really disintegrated. I think we saw that a lot in COVID, but we don't have those in-person meeting groups. We have Facebook groups, but not in person, not somebody that sees you on a regular basis, that holds you accountable, or that you can talk about troubles with. We just don't have that anymore in a lot of places. And so I think that's absolutely necessary, because a lot of the integration, the aftercare, is discipline, is having other people hold us accountable, but also having that support where you can exchange ideas. You want to do better because you're part of this group that also wants to do better. And then you can also help other members of the group that are struggling themselves. So community ecosystem that gives back to itself, trains people, and instills sort of the sense of like, I want to do better for this group that I'm a part of. And so that's really what we're going to try to explore in terms of, we're not going to be creating the communities, but what can we do to promote communities developing themselves, or what sort of tools can we do to make sure that it's more likely to succeed? Because community development is a very hard piece. And I know you all are working on it in your own right.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the Maloka. I didn't think I'd be talking about that, but it's the brainchild of one of the co-founders of Soltara, as well as the former facilitator, Melissa and Sylvia. And that's what we at Soltara saw was lacking, this aftercare, this community. How do you continue to integrate the lessons of plant medicine in your daily life and tap into that place that you experienced on retreat? But then, of course, at home, it's more challenging than ever, because the infrastructure is not really there to hold you accountable or to support you as you navigate really challenging hurdles. And actually, we had a guest previously in these conversations who is an applied neurology practitioner. And she was also reminding us of the fact that, no two nervous systems are alike. And so what might be very useful for your integration, Jesse, will probably be very different than mine. And there isn't this like panacea or one size fits all for both ayahuasca or the integration afterwards. And even being able to develop the vocabulary for what that looks like is a process in and of itself. And so, very much echo what you're sharing. And I think that, like you said, a lot has changed in the last 3 to 4 years, but there's obviously room to grow. And so, let's bring it back to veterans, because I think, I've never been in the military. I can only imagine, doing ayahuasca for, the average human being is scary enough as it is. But then doing ayahuasca when you come from, a military background or have had those experiences is, a very unique experience. And so when you are, you do a lot of speaking engagements, you're out there in the community. Can you tell us a little bit about, when you speak to vets who have never heard about ayahuasca or plant medicine or have never considered psychedelics, like, what do you think are the biggest barriers for them to access this? And, I just want to open this up to understand, like, how can we give more access to more people who need this medicine, and where are those barriers? So we really shine a light on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points there in terms of communication and then access. We'll talk about it a little bit after. Communication, I mean, I think the value of the organization of Heroic Hearts from the beginning was just as we have different neurosystems, we have different sub communities, we have different groups, different ways of approaching things, right? So if you're a professional or a neuroscientist, if you're talking to your colleagues, you're going to have jargon and all this kind of stuff and know how to talk to them probably different from somebody else. So it's the same with the military. And that's really what I wanted to try to bring is make this more approachable to that group. And so it's always been sort of a straightforward, not add anything else, and describe it in ways that are more approachable. So even in talking about some of the Shipibo beliefs and ways of approaching this, or psychedelic beliefs and ways of approaching this, or ceremony, um, presenting it as what it is and in a very straightforward of like, I'm not trying to make you believe this, but this is how it's been believed by these tribes, and this is how the process works, and this is what we know, this is what we don't know, these are the stories. We're just not adding anything else that's beyond us. And I think having that very straightforward approach of like, this is where the science is, this is anecdotally what we've seen, this is some of the beliefs of why we believe it works, and then that allows people kind of a menu of like, okay, that makes sense to me, that makes sense to me. Some people might need the research to kind of get their brain going. Some people just might need the emotional connection. Some people might need something else. So I think it's just kind of having a straightforward menu without trying to indoctrinate anyone into like, this is the way, this is what you have to believe. Um, but again, the problem unfortunately is so bad that especially after the first year, we really haven't had to work that hard in getting veterans. There's so many that are suffering from mental health. They've found us, especially as the word kind of comes out. And so then our job is to, again, educate as much as we have. We're not here to push psychedelics on anybody. We have a policy that we don't push anybody. We don't try to convince. But if they do, if they are interested, then we will provide them the best guidance information that we can possible. So then it's their choice. Because at the end of the day, this, as you know, something like an ayahuasca experience can be so difficult. And so the person has to themselves be fully committed to it. Because if it is that very challenging experience and somebody else is pushing or they're going there for somebody else, then they might be more inclined to be like, oh, this is not for me. I got what I needed. I'm going to go. But they really need to give them full selves because it can, a lot of vets we've had, it's one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do. And to go into that next night ceremony takes a lot of courage, but it also takes that sort of like, I'm here for a reason. I'm here to heal myself. And so it's providing that container of support and container of vulnerability where people feel safe being vulnerable that I think allows people to get into that spot. And that's where the preparation comes in. So it doesn't like, they're not expecting this happy-go-lucky vacation and then get hit by a sledgehammer. They're going into it knowing it might be difficult. On the other piece, again, the community is sort of that key in my mind to accessibility, to increased access. And we want to be conscientious where we all are at in this space, that we have this voice, because we know as it's getting more popular, that often leads to exploitation, that often leads to bad practices. It leads to a lot of not great stuff, whether it's exploiting the natural resources or exploiting the healers themselves. I know that's already been in some cases. And how do we prepare, how do we talk, and not just us talking, obviously that's the big problem, but bring in these indigenous voices into the conversation, so it's not just led by Western groups. But on the local level, and this is kind of the evolving piece, especially as policies change in different states, what does the American culture of it look like? If laws do change, I do think, like, for instance, psilocybin, which is a little bit more approachable, having access on a community basis where there's still, some sort of controls, there's still some sort of safety sides, but people can go to a circle versus they don't have to go to the physician MD to get the psilocybin. Because right now, where we're going in the US anyway, is that we're seeing amazing results in terms of treating depression, PTSD, anxiety, addiction. But there is a big pressure to just medicalize it. You have to go to a doctor, you have to go to a therapist. Like the MAPS model, you have two attendings there, and this just becomes very cost prohibitive. And the communities
Mm.
that are not served currently by mental health will continue to not be it, even if we have these breakthroughs, and even if they are somewhat accessible on a generic basis. So I think in terms of the U.S., in terms of actually changing mental health, that's sort of the key of what we need to develop. Of having, if you want to go the medical model and you prefer to go to a doctor in a clinic, perfectly fine. But we can't have that limited to just that. We need to respect sacraments and religious traditions that have, you know, predated the FDA. But we also, I think, need to have a little bit open access, still with, like I said, safety mechanisms in place.
Yeah, I really appreciate you're always considering and really centering the Indigenous tradition and the Shipibo. I know that, Heroic Hearts Project has a very strong partnership with, the Indigenous community, always thinking about ways to give back to the healers that you work with, honoring, the origins of these traditions. Um, and I don't know quite the question I want to ask, but I'd love to like go into that a little bit more. And how do you guys, you know, I guess continuously learn from the Shipibo, and as the way that you guys, set up retreat and work with your veterans evolves, like how do you continuously factor in, yeah, Shipibo lineage and wisdom with that? Do you want to just describe that partnership or how it works, or just give us a little peek under the hood of what that actually looks like, and maybe some of the challenges even that come with that territory?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't say, I think on our side, I think there's we could probably always do better too. I always try to talk and get the honest opinion of people like Shakruna, like Via Labat from there.
Mm,
People who are more connected, people. I think humility is sort of the baseline answer. Is I have to try to do my best, but I also have to understand. I'm coming from a Western American like culture side of things, and so I have to approach this cautiously. Even if
right.
people listen to me or I'm in this conferences, I have this privilege that maybe a lot of Indigenous voices don't have. So I have to come to it at that sort of approach, but also not overspeak or overstep where my role in that spot is. So we can always do better, and that's sort of the goal of like what can we do better. And so we've always tried to give back, and whether it's Shipibo or other tribes, there's a lot of different cultures, there's a lot of different traditions in these spots, and with different psychedelics. So if we work with in Mexico or with other substances of where this is coming from and how can we be the most respectful, and that's also sort of the vetting process, making sure these healers want to work with us. Obviously there's the balance. We want to make sure everybody's compensated, but they also want to make sure they want to work with veterans, and it's aligned with their work. So it's just having those conversations. With ayahuasca, you often sit in ceremonies with people, and then just seeing what organizations are doing that better than we can. So, like I said, Shakruna has an Indigenous Reciprocity Fund. There's some other ones out there that are doing sort of similar stuff, and then they really rely on the local organizations, the local tribes to make the decisions for that. And the same thing with policy, like the policies we've been involved with, like in California, it was out respect to a lot of Native American
Mm,
tribes that didn't want peyote to be in those initiatives. So on our side, they have their own plan for it. So we want to respect that and then work with them in an effective sort of way. So, like I said, it's coming at it with humility and coming at it with probably the understanding that we can probably do better, so we don't repeat sort of past traditions. And that kind of comes from sort of a sense of, I think it's how the Western mindset and the Western medical model needs to evolve a little bit. And I think there's an opportunity with psychedelics is that maybe we don't know everything, and maybe there's a lot of knowledge in these traditions that have often been sort of downplayed or cast aside that our science just hasn't caught up to. And the common example I use often is if you just went back 20, 30 years, and you said you did meditation or yoga, people would look at you like a yuppie or a hippie or just kind of like cast you off, right? Just because it seemed like this kind of woo woo thing that didn't have any validity, and you're just trying to be cool or what have you. But now we're at a point where science, oh hey, meditation is actually helpful, to the point where they're teaching these things in the military itself. And so we have to kind of come to this, I think, more humility kind of stuff of just because it hasn't gone through an FDA trial or we don't have the specific answers does not mean it's not valid. And so I think we're still at that point where we might accept that psychedelics have potential medical value, but we still might not understand icados, or we might not understand the ceremonial side. That doesn't mean just because it doesn't fit in our current models that there's nothing to it. But I think it means that we need to find different ways of approaching this and having respect for things that evolved in their own right. So that's what we're always trying to do, of being respectful, but doing what's best to help the veterans that are seeking our help.
Yeah, it's a both and situation, right? Like, you can heal without understanding exactly how it works, right? And continue your process. And also, as you guys are doing, tracking the research and being advocates and doing your due diligence, especially in the scientific realm, which is a question I wanted to ask you next. Research, education, advocacy are pillars at Heroic Hearts Project. And you guys have some exciting research collaborations going on, one with the Center for Psychedelic Research and Therapy at UT, right, to look at how we can treat prolonged grief and depression in spouses of veterans that have been lost in the line of duty. I think that's really interesting, and would love to give you space to share about that. Why did you choose this area of study, and how has this targeted research, I'm not sure like where it is in terms of process, but how it will or has translated to real world application and treatment initiatives. So whatever you'd like to share about that.
Yeah, I think again, it kind of goes into the communication, is like what we do try to teach and give people respect for traditional ways. But I also think there's value in understanding as much as we can right now in the scientific realm. And for somebody that might be the turning point, and especially as a nonprofit, we do need to have, the way the Western world views this is like, what's the scientific data behind that? So we try to hit it from different sides, of different ways of telling the story, different ways of understanding it. Hopefully that also improves our program, just because, like I said, we're going to have, I think, different ways. Our trauma is going to come out maybe different ways than maybe somebody that grows up in a Shipibo tribe or something. So how do we evolve our understanding and best treating these veterans? So we've always tried to be pretty active in the research space. We worked with the University of Georgia. We were doing a gut microbiome study with the University of Colorado Boulder, how ayahuasca affects the microbiome. We're going to continue that with some researchers in the UK. We're doing a psilocybin study with Imperial College of London that's going to focus on psilocybin mushrooms and traumatic brain injury, so veterans that had brain injury. And then the UT Austin one, it's a 3-part study. So you mentioned the first part where it's psilocybin mushrooms with spouses that lost loved ones in service, or loved ones to suicide, veterans to suicide. The second one will be ibogaine, so veterans that have head trauma, and that's working with the mission within. So special ops veterans will go to ibogaine therapy, which has been pretty helpful with PTSD as well as traumatic brain injury. And then the third part will be veterans, combat trauma veterans, going to ayahuasca and seeing how that affects it. And so we'll be doing those studies right now. The spouses is the one that's we're filling right now. And so that's going to be pretty groundbreaking, because that one's interesting just because, the veterans often get a lot of the focus, but trauma does not just stay in one individual, it spreads, right? So the spouses of veterans, the wives or husbands, often have their own trauma from just being around it, or the worry, or just being in that sort of container. And so if you just heal one part of the entity, then you're still going to have problems, or there's going to cause more rifts because one person's on this path. And so we work with organizations like the Hope Project, run by Allison Wilson. She focuses on spouses, and often she provides coaching. So the vets that go through our program, she'll provide coaching to the wives, as well as give them an opportunity for their own medicine healing if they so choose it. And so that puts both husband and wife on similar pathways, and also able to address other issues that might have come up. That one's super interesting just because it really expands. Integration is just not like a quick word, buzzword, or you just have to do this checklist. It involves a family, it involves different levels of where you need that support and you need to have these conversations. And as, kind of still a smaller organization, we have that flexibility where we can kind of look into interesting things. On the bigger level, especially the for-profit companies, they have to get things through FDA. So they have to push psilocybin to treat high-level things like depression or this or that, which is great. It's needed, but that doesn't really tell how that's in a clinical, very sterile, like set sort of way. But when people are in the real world and they don't have all that support, how does this actually affect? And so we have a little bit more flexibility of kind of more real world applications. We can look into interesting things that might not be beneficial for these bigger studies like gut microbiome, or these more unique sort of sides of it. So that's always what we've tried to use with our flexibility and just experience in doing these smaller studies.
Wow, that's a lot of studies you've got under your belt. Congratulations. I mean, there's so much health, mind, body. It's all interconnected. The gut microbiome, the brain, trauma, the nervous system, the endocrine system, the immune system. So you're really touching on this holistic healing path, and I'm really excited to see what applications and policies, even protocols, can stem from this really exciting research. And I guess I always like to ask a question through the lens of someone who is really new to all of this, who may be curious about plant medicine, who's just starting to get their heads around psychedelic therapy as a really efficacious, is that a word, modality. And for someone who is curious but really doesn't know very much about these topics, from where you sit, can you just share, I'm sure you have a gazillion anecdotes, but just a short anecdote of a veteran's life that has been impacted by ayahuasca or whatever psychedelic treatment is most near and dear to your heart, and just share just like a quick, how has it changed that person, if they don't have examples of what that story even is.
Yeah, so unfortunately, in this space, we get a lot of examples of it. It really just, giving people the reaffirmation of their life, of the love of their life. One that always sticks to my mind: a guy named Rudy, former Green Beret sniper, went to one of our retreats. Tall guy, very foreboding. Kind of, you saw him, wouldn't want to mess with him. This is actually a retreat we did at Soltara a few years back. Came in, man, a few words, did a few ceremonies. I think after the second ceremony, just really changed. He really opened up and became kind of goofy and joking, and it really gave him sort of a reaffirmation of his life. So he kind of regained his goofy post high school self, because he went straight after high school and then had all the military layers. So he's still effective, he still could do the military, but he wasn't burdened. He didn't lose the other cool aspects of himself. And the reason that story stuck is just because we keep in touch and post. He has a young son. And so it had, implications with his relationship and all this other sort of stuff. So it did have these sort of big dynamics. And so him and his wife separated, but amicably, just because they both realized that, they got to the spot, and they finally talked about it. And so they both got to a better spot individually, because they were more honest after this. But then talking about his son, of just how, because he wasn't treated, he wasn't in this always military mode, his son got to see like a warmer, jovial, joking side that wanted to spend time, that enjoyed these interactions, which is so powerful because you see so many cases where, like I said, these traumas become generational and just get passed on, passed on. And so just breaking the cycle just has such implications for how many people and how effective these can be. You know, it's a pretty common story of people having parents in Vietnam and how much that trauma affected them, and then they pass that on to their kids. And so that is sort of the breaking cycle of not only helping the individual but generations to come as well. And I think giving kids the example of, hey, I'm going to put my mental health as priority. And again, so that kind of goes with this whole sort of family dynamic of it, of just the potential of psychedelics to unburden you from trauma, to allow your true self and vulnerability and the great parts of yourself to come out as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, there are so many stories out there, but sometimes it just takes one. And even though I didn't have that experience, I can relate to, wow, just wanting to reconnect to myself before all those layers piled on, whatever those layers were for me, but we all have them. And to know that this isn't, you know, a short-term fix. These changes are long-lasting, and it doesn't just stay within ourselves. It ripples out into our families, our communities, and can inspire other people that are also suffering, that are looking for ways to really and truly heal. So thank you for sharing that. And as we kind of close out this conversation, just want to ask you, how can people support Heroic Hearts Project? Is there anything that you want to leave us with today? Of course, we're going to include show notes and links and all that good stuff, but final words from you?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who wants to support, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you are able to support financially, that is the directest and helps us the most. So you can go to our website, heroicheartsproject.org. There's, /donate, there's donate buttons all over there. If you're interested in looking for more information, we have a lot of great information on our website. We do have an ambassador program for people who want to get a little bit more involved or just follow along a little bit closer. And for any veterans listening, we have our application on the website as well. And so they can just fill out that application. And then they kind of get in the roster and updates on the retreats when we run them. So yeah, those are the best ways to support. Go to our website, and then our Instagram is kind of the main social media we're using right now. So Heroic Hearts Project on Instagram.
There we go, guys. Well, this has been an incredibly empowering conversation for me. Jesse's been written up by tons of publications, so you guys can check out his work and just what's going on in the veterans and psychedelic space. But I think this conversation just allows us to really go a layer deeper and understand how we can all play a part, because no part is too small. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.